The Public Newsroom is hosted by City Bureau. If you don't know us, City Bureau is a nonprofit news organization. We're based in Bronzeville, and we aim to create media that's impactful, equitable, and responsive to the public. We do that in a couple of different ways. Of course, tonight, bringing y'all into conversation with us is one of those ways. We have a couple other pathways that I'll share a little bit more about at the end of the event. I already forgot whether I introduced myself or not, but if you don't know me, my name is Ellie. I am Community Resource Organizer for City Bureau, and I manage this event series for City Bureau. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the way that local media covers queer communities and the issues that affect us, the barriers to information access that queer Chicagoans face. And also we'll be highlighting some of the media and storytelling work that queer South and West Siders do outside of conventional outlets. Our panelists today are Ireashia Bennett. Ireashia is a multidisciplinary artist and transmedia storyteller who explores trauma, survival, and healing within Black and queer communities. They've got the really cool purple fan right now. They also produce the Frankly podcast for the Center for Interdisciplinary Inquiry and Innovation in Sexual and Reproductive Health, also known as CI3, which explores the health and well-being of youth from the perspectives of young people on the South and West Sides. We're also joined today by Adam Rhodes. Adam's got the cool chain and the blue hair. Adam is a queer first-generation Cuban American who covers all kinds of social justice issues for the Chicago Reader. Their reporting has shined a light on the struggles to access HIV treatment, highly criticized surgeries on infants, and police reform, as well as a history of anti-Black racism in Boys Town / North Halsted. Just a couple more announcements here. If you didn't hear the cool robot voice when you came in, I'll say it again. We are recording this session, and we're also currently live streaming on Facebook. If you don't want to be recorded, that's totally cool. Just go ahead and turn off your video. We are going to do some breakout groups later on, and they are not recorded, so feel free to have your camera on then. If you need or would like closed captions, you can hit the CC button on the bottom of your screen, or if you're tuning in from Facebook, I believe you can click the gear icon. If you're not actively sharing out, please keep yourself muted so that we avoid any background noise. And if you have any issues with Zoom, please feel free to drop any questions in the chat. I also want to point everyone's attention to my colleague, Christina, who is helping me keep an eye on the chat and just sort of with supporting y'all if anyone encounters any support needs. So feel free to shoot her a message if that, if you need any help with anything. Okay, so now that we have run through all of the logistics and the announcements, I would love to bring a little bit of energy into the room and also just get a sense for who's here. So we're gonna do a really quick little zap of an activity called New and Good. It's very simple. We'll just spend the next 5 minutes or so doing it. Basically, if you're called on, just go ahead and share your name, your neighborhood, and one thing that's making you feel good this week. And once you go, make sure to pass it to someone else to keep things going. We only have about 5 minutes, so I don't think that we'll get through everyone probably, but we'll just sort of see who we can get to share some stuff with us. So I'll go first. My name's Ellie, like I mentioned. I live in Bridgeport, Chicago. And one thing that's bringing me joy this week outside of this conversation that I'm really excited for is I went to the 31st Street Beach on Sunday, and there were just so many little kids who were like running around and having the time of their lives, and their joy was very contagious. So that really kept me going. And I'll popcorn it to Adam.
Hey everyone, I'm Adam. I live in Rogers Park, and what is making me feel good this week is my dog. I have a little beagle puppy named Hibachi, and ordinarily she's not the snuggliest of dogs in the world, and she can be a little crazy, or she gets a little amped up. But this week she's been like really, really mellow and really, really snuggly, so I'm enjoying her calmness for once.
Who are you going to pass to?
I'm going to pass to, is it Shelly?
Hi. Was it me? Or okay,
Yep,
sorry.
Shelly.
My video's not on, so I'm like, I don't know if you're talking to me. I'm Shelly Nicole. I am in Pilsen. Lovely, beautiful Pilsen. It's a really pretty day out over here, and I am very happy to have AC. That's what's making me happy. During this heat wave that we have, it's been making me very happy because I'm terrible when I'm hot. Um, I think that's all the questions, right? All right, and I'm gonna popcorn it over to India Daniels. That's just who I see next.
Hi, thanks, Shelly. My name is India. Something new and good in my life is I have a Greek basil plant in my room, and it needs a lot of water, which is, I feel like, a good daily reminder to me as well. I will pass to Alia.
Hi, I'm Ileah. It's really great to be here. And one thing that is making me smile this week is that right after this is over, I am going to go tap dance at the Harold Washington Cultural Center here in Bronzeville. And I'm really excited about it. I will pass to... oh my gosh, wow, this is harder than I thought. Charmaine.
Hey y'all, I'm Charmaine, I use she, her, and I live in South Loop, newly South Loop. And so the new and good thing that is happening this week is that I'm finally getting a couch. I've been sitting on the floor for the past 3 weeks, and I'm really excited to not be sitting on the floor just because there are no other options. So yeah, I will pass it to Scott.
Okay, what a surprise. My name's Scott. I live in Evanston, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, as people tend to say, because I've been without internet for 24 hours, and it's a horrible, horrible experience. So don't ever let that happen to you. But here I am. I'm back, which is a good thing. So let me pass it to Max.
Thanks, Scott. Happy to have you back. Hello, everybody. I'm Max. I'm calling in from Brooklyn, New York tonight. And the most exciting thing for me this week is that a friend of mine is going to be a dad. I just learned about it the other night. So I'm super excited to meet that baby next year. And last but not least, I'm going to kick it over to Amanda Geppert.
Hey, good evening. Sorry I'm late. My name is Amanda Geppert. My pronouns are she, they. I live in Logan Square, and one of the things that's making me feel really good this week is my favorite ZZ plant has like 4 new babies. It's like sprouting and growing, and it's beautiful. So thanks for being here. Do I need to pass it? I came late. Am I the last one? Am I the closer?
I think we're at time. So thank you for sharing, and thank you for reminding me. No need to apologize for being late. In fact, I really encourage everyone to like float in and out of this event as much as you want. We like want to make sure that you're feeling good and grounded and rested and taking care of yourself in whatever way you need to. So thanks also for sharing, everyone. It's really great to see who's in the room and just like hear what's bringing everyone joy this week. We're going to go ahead and transition into our panel. I want to encourage everyone to react, add your thoughts, and ask any questions in the chat. We only have about 45 minutes, so we probably won't be able to get through like everyone's question if we've got a lot, but please do participate in that way if you want to. All right, so to kick things off, Adam, want to start with you. I am wondering if you could share with us, what does reporting that serves queer Chicagoans well look like? And, on the other side of that coin, what are some of the common pitfalls that we see in reporting on queer people and issues in the city?
Yeah, so I think at the most basic level, reporting that serves queer Chicagoans well is reporting that meets their needs where they are. I think and this goes hand in hand with some common pitfalls. I think there's sometimes a tendency to focus on the very macro things that are going on right now in terms of queer issues, like obviously like access to trans healthcare. Several years ago, it was same-sex marriage, things like that. But I think when reporters who don't cover queer issues day in and day out cover queer issues, oftentimes from a very surface level understanding and just investigation, I think, or just surface level reporting, I would find. And I think reporting that serves queer Chicagoans well is reporting that is like nuanced and I guess is a little more revelatory than just a localized national story.
Ireashia, same question for you. What are some of the ways that, what does reporting that serves queer Chicagoans well look like, and what are some common issues in our local coverage?
Can you repeat that question?
Yeah, basically, what are some ways that that journalists or like media can serve queer folks well in their reporting, and what are some of the ways in which, specifically in Chicago, we see like queer coverage falling a little bit short?
Yeah, I think journalists should see like the issues that affect queer people from the queer person's or the queer community's point of view. And that really looks like really wanting to connect with them as humans first, right? Because usually when journalists cover a story is really fact-based, and the human piece to it is really lost. So I think that the more that journalists kind of like see beyond current issue or like more of a like just a story thing and really look at the issue from like all sides or from a queer person's perspective, I think that will really serve the queer community better than what and how journalists have been doing. And the second question was like, what can newsrooms do better?
Mm-hmm.
Hire more queer journalists. Hire, get out of like, don't be so disconnected, like invite queer people into either events or I don't know, like go beyond like reporting on queer issues and like really begin to support queer folks by harnessing them with the power to tell those stories,
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, for queer people living on the South and West sides, what are some of the unique barriers that we face in accessing information that's relevant and useful for our lives?
Questions like these always like make me uncomfortable because I feel like the spokesperson for all queer people on South and West sides. But from my perspective, I would definitely love more just physical space that queer folks can share, and whether that's dancing and sharing meals when we can go outside for real, or, having like a kind of like a central place where we can share ideas or have events, because that's usually how we communicate about things. That's usually how we kind of talk through and also release like rage, right? And release hard emotions. And I don't see that, when I think of Boys Town or even like anything south, north side, I think of like all of the cafes and all of the spaces the clubs, all those spaces where, queer folks can gather. And I don't see that where I am sitting in Washington Park. So I think that would be a really significant thing to begin. And not to say it doesn't exist, right? Because I feel like, Party Noir was a space where Black and brown queer folks could come. But it's not as prevalent as, Boys Town. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Adam, really curious to hear your answer on the same question.
Yeah, I think in terms of like the accessing information, I don't live on the south or the west side, so I guess I'm speaking from like a north side-ish perspective. But I think there is a tendency in the media to focus on, when to reporting on queer issues, to really focus on that like North Hollywood block as like the center of the city's queer community, and doesn't seek out other voices or any perspectives or anything outside, I guess, this like very comfortable set of white cisgender men mostly. And so I think the biggest like barrier in accessing information is that oftentimes reporters aren't really looking to serve those populations either. And I think that can be like the biggest barrier.
Yeah, so I'm hearing, like coverage tends to be really focused on white queer communities in the North Side. I'm hearing sort of like thinking about that as like stand-in for queer community in general, and just sort of like maybe not the right sort of like attention to like thinking about things through a queer lens. I'm wondering, like for either of you, like what are some suggestions that maybe you could provide about like how would we approach like issues from a queer lens, right? Like what are some questions maybe that we could ask to think about, like what is the queer angle, or how will this like affect queer people, right?
I think that can sometimes be challenging because like oftentimes like we treat the queer community as like this monolith, but what's going to affect like issues that affect like trans women or trans men or non-binary people are oftentimes going to be very different than the issues that impact cisgender men, cisgender women, people who have a lot more social power than the more marginalized people in the community. But I think like very broadly, to, I guess, look at things through a more queer lens, I think really it just takes like listening to queer people almost. I think particularly when people aren't used to looking at things through a queer lens, I think that's the time that people need to almost be focusing on other people's expertise as opposed to like their own thoughts and their own like ideas of what like the angle of the story is. And that's come up in, my own reporting on queer issues, that as soon as I like kind of like the sources or the people who are communicating with me kind of like guide the story or like tell me what like the actual issues are, that's when I find like the issues of the stories with like the most nuance, and those are the stories that I think are the most revelatory.
Yeah, and I'm actually really curious, Adam, if we could probe at that like a little bit more as a journalist. Like concretely, what are some stories that you've covered where like you maybe haven't necessarily like thought like, oh, this story is sort of like going to like be about the effects on queer people or sort of like reported for queer folks, but that has revealed itself through the process of reporting?
Yeah, I'm really trying to think, because I think almost all of my articles I go through and I was like, how does this impact queer people? Yeah, I mean, I think that's how I kind of go think about all of my stories. But I think one thing that my boss really, like my boss, Tracy Bame, who is an incredible queer journalist, I think she likes to say that every story has a queer angle. So like if you're reporting on taxes, if you're reporting on TIFs, or if you're reporting on like Lollapalooza, there's always going to be a queer angle. I think it just takes like the dedication and the interest to actually go finding that angle.
Ireashia, I want to ask this next question to you because you are an artist and a writer who I think does a really great job of sort of highlighting and telling stories about queer people and themes in a way that sometimes diverges from traditional media. So I'm curious, like, what are some of the ways that queer folks, particularly, you know, having identified this like over focus on the north side, queer folks of color on the south and west sides are already doing some media, storytelling, narrative shaping work outside of traditional outlets?
I definitely see a lot of beautiful artwork, installations, exhibitions that are centering around care, are centering around nourishment and community, and really pouring, and also, you know, self-love, obviously, but I think like films and some of the most engaging media that I have found inspiring recently is the ways that people use digital space, games, virtual reality to kind of reimagine and reshape history and time. And in relationship to queerness, Blackness, disability. And I aspire to that, you know, like I want to go beyond creating a podcast about queer folks. I want to talk about like how can queer folks like be at the forefront and center of shaping our own like narratives, right? And our own, how are we already documenting and archiving our personal histories? I see it through Instagram. I see it through the way that we connect and the way that we move in community. So I think that's kind of like what I'm witnessing, what I've experienced recently, yeah.
Adam, any thoughts on the same question? What are some ways that folks are, you know, doing the sort of storytelling and media work outside of conventional outlets?
Yeah, I think, like Ireashia said, I think it's oftentimes like the creating of space on these communities, creating space on our own, and just like, I guess, understanding that like, okay, if like these traditional outlets, these traditional like landscapes, like are going to like continue to either not report issues that matter to us or like poorly report them, then we're going to tell our stories we're going to tell our stories on our own. And I think that is kind of increasingly becoming common in marginalized communities, just because like there is obviously a host of issues with like how the legacy media has like covered various marginalized communities. So I think I've just seen like a lot of like agency and like a lot of people like taking the power to tell their own stories, and I love that. So that's just what.
And I also, just to add to that, I think that the accessibility of media, of video through like technology has really helped that. And one thing that I think about a lot is the role that the archive plays, specifically in leaving. Mia Mingus, educator and the disability justice activist, always says, you know, we must leave evidence, right? We must leave evidence that we exist. And I think that queer artists, especially Black and Brown, I can only speak from the Black queer experience. So that's kind of like where I'm coming from. But we're like, I lost my train of thought, hold on. Where is it? We're leaving evidence that we exist, and that we not only existed, but we existed in joy, right? And we survived and we thrived and we like loved and held each other and ourselves. And I think that is so beautiful. And it goes like, sometimes when I think about like how queer stories have been told through films, it's always been this like level of repression. You know, I think about right now, like the queer story in Lovecraft Country, right? The HBO show, and how that queer story was about pain and like the repression of one character. And I think new media, I think gaming, I think the way that our generation is using media to retell those stories and reshape those things is really, really dope. And I've never seen that before. And I think the archives can be a tool for that too, right? We don't really talk about the archives when we're talking about journalism or even art. It's always this other thing, but it can be a portal to future generations and to look at the complexity of queer lives and queer stories. And yeah, I just wanted to say that.
I'm so glad you did, and so many people in the chat are also, I think, share that sentiment with me. While we're on the subject, I'd actually love for you to share, if you would like to, a little bit more about your own work and how you're sort of exploring these like Black queer themes and issues through that. I know we haven't really had much of a chance to do that yet, and I know it also has a lot to do with archives.
Yeah, so my work is, where do I start? No, I'm kidding. I make work for people who are ugly, people who are disabled, people who are never really fully seen as desirable in some way. And I think that when I think about like queer stories, I think about this glamour of you have to look like this, or you have to look like, you know, perfect or desirable or thin or, you know, whatever. And I think my work is really about moving away from that and really embracing the wisdom that comes with owning who I am and how I exist in the world. So I think my work is part that, and also part like, I don't know, just whatever I feel, you know, whatever I'm working with at any given moment. And I have to remind myself that whether I'm speaking about this like big social issue, or whether I'm just talking about the isolation I felt within the pandemic and how that has, you know, blah, 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 that's still a queer story that's deserving to be told and deserving to be preserved. And yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I love your connection to archives specifically, because one way that I often think about like the stakes of journalism and why it's like really important to do it right is this sort of adage, right, of like journalism is the first draft of history. And I think that like that certainly like affects queer people in like huge ways, right? And especially with what you're saying with regards to sort of like our erasure from the historical record. Shifting gears just a little bit, I see a question in the chat from Tom. Tom asks, how can I, as a gay, white, cisgender man, help lift other voices? I try to get as wide of viewpoints as I can, and I'm always willing to promote others, but I'm not sure I'm always taking active steps. So Adam, maybe that's like a good question for you.
Yeah, totally. I think if we're thinking from like a reporter's perspective, I think it's important to always think like, no matter like what the issue you're covering is, like who has the most power, even among the people that are like that are, I guess, adversely affected by something, if that's like the angle of this story. And then I think it's always important to find the people with like the least power in that situation and try to uplift them as much as possible. Obviously, if we're talking about like the queer community, that's Black and brown trans people, non-binary people who like don't fit the mold that like we commonly see in media. But I think just if you're looking how to like, I guess, improve like your own coverage, then I would just say like something that I found really useful is actually doing like a source audit, which like I just like go through all of the sources that I use in an article or that I've used in like all of my articles, and then I will literally just like mark down what I know to be these my sources' identities, and that can be really, really illuminating. So I think having that dedication to like wanting to uplift the most marginalized voices, I think that's almost like half the battle, really.
We've got another question in the chat here. Do you know of any good investigative journalism about local LGBTQ plus institutions? And what role does that have to play in improving our conversation about our community? Ireashia or Adam, feel free to jump in here.
I really don't know if there's a ton of like really good like investigative reporting about like specific queer institutions. Like, I mean, like, I promise this is not a humble brag. The only one that comes to mind is like my reporting on like boys or the North Halsted community and like the racism there. But like, I don't know that there's like one particular institution in the queer community that I think has received its own like very focused and like deserved investigation, if that makes sense.
Folks have any other questions for the chat or for our panelists? Feel free to either unmute yourselves or just drop them in the chat.
Yeah, I have one that, excuse me, that I run into quite a bit. And what does queer mean, actually?
That's a really good level setting question.
Well, I talk to gay people, I talk to bi people, and they don't necessarily know what it means. It's kind of an amorphous term. And particularly when you're talking to people who have no interest in or are even antagonistic to whatever a queer community happens to be, they have no clue what it means. Whatever they're against, they don't even know. So it would be helpful. It seems that the definition is either not consistent or is too broad. Maybe it embraces too many types of people. I don't know.
I think, Scott, you've actually asked a question that's very active with queer folks. Is certainly one that I've encountered in my own networks. Ireashia and Adam want to give you guys a chance to answer this, but just to sort of give like a quick where we're coming from using that word is just sort of as an umbrella term for folks that identify as queer, basically. I'm
sorry to interrupt, but the traditional definition is gay. And I think that's where a lot of people get confused, particularly people of my generation. And I'm older, queer to them means gay. And so there's a real communication gap there, I think.
I think that actually you're hitting on a really important point, which comes up in a lot of the work that we do at City Bureau has come up before, is that, of course, like not everybody is as conversant in certain marginalized groups' issues, right? And so there are like some generational gaps for sure when we're talking about queer folks. There's a gap between sort of like straight people and queer people, right? In terms of how they sort of like answer that question. And it is something that I think like just thinking about City Bureau has come up when, for example, we use the word Latinx instead of Latino or Latina, right? That's something that comes to mind really readily, is like we want to make sure we're being inclusive of people along the gender spectrum. And we also want to make sure that we're inclusive of people who maybe have not had the chance to learn as much about like what that word might mean. So this might actually be, now that I'm thinking about it, a way that journalists can serve the queer community well. I don't know how much, I don't know if I want to take my own suggestion, but it strikes me that, media outlets are in a really good position to do this kind of education work for the general public that might not be as aware of what these words mean.
Frankly, my limited experience, but I've had some talks with people who are close to me about this. They don't know what it means, and they're not willing to try to say what it means. And these are gay people, these are bi people. And so I have to think if there's confusion within the so-called community, there has to be even more confusion outside the community, or maybe that community thinks they know what it means and they're completely wrong. So, I think that's fairly important.
Yeah, Adam or Ireashia, any thoughts on this question?
I co-sign a lot of what you said already, and I just want to highlight too that language evolves with people and with communities, and I think that conflict between the younger generation and older folks is because there's an inability to change with the times, and I think it is like a two-way street, right? Like us younger generations can be better at explaining that and be more eloquent in that, but who got that time? But I definitely hear this this back and forth for sure.
Anything to add, Adam?
I was actually just going to say, it's I think just language evolves. Queer used to be a slur. People used to it used to be an insult, and now people have taken it back. So I think it's really just language evolves a ton. So I think, I think that's really all I have to add.
But it can only evolve, language that is used as slur can only evolve when those marginalized reclaim that word. I just want to clarify that too. I think that's another thing around queerness, or the word queer is even my mom recently was when I told her I was queer, she was she took it as a bad thing. And I'm no, my queerness is blah, 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 blah. And so, I just wanted to add that too.
Maybe that's what I'm more struggling with, is how do you communicate this to people who either don't care or are actually antagonistic and have a negative and probably incorrect, view or interpretation of what queer is. And clearly it's not something we can resolve here, but I think it's more than language evolving. That's obviously true, but it's also what do you do with it? In other words, how do you communicate outward, and what kind of value is there in actually communicating outward to helping people understand? So
yeah, totally. Scott, I think I'll follow up with you after this, because I think this is a good conversation and there's some resources to send your way. But I also wanted to elevate, someone in the chat shared this really great comment. The word queer can mean whatever you'd like. I use it as an umbrella term or in addition to explaining my queer identity. I identify as a queer lesbian, or sometimes I just say lesbian or dyke or femme. But also, who has the time to sit there and explain stuff like that all the time? So I appreciate that, Shelley. And we have time for just one more question here. So want to shout out Kaya or Kaya, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but they ask, what would y'all like to see from young queer people in art, journalism, etc.? So with that broad open question, Adam or Ireashia, any thoughts?
I think I am continually so impressed with what I see young queer people doing and creating and stuff like that. So I don't know if I would want to see anything more from them as much as I would just to see more opportunities for young queer people to be able to tell their stories, because I think there's so much value in hearing those stories. I think I just wish there were like more platforms and more places that were like willing to uplift those voices.
Definitely second that. I feel like young queer journalists are just so, and artists are always like just on another level with shit. You know, like I feel like whatever I think I know is gonna happen, or like what I think I want to see, they're just like, oh, we're gonna take it to like the next level. So I'm constantly just like inspired by that. And I definitely, you know, just kind of adding, like, I think mentorship and access to resources, again, is some of the most important things that folks with power, money, prestige can do to support young queer artists and journalists, for sure. Because they have the juice, you know, like they are, they just need the access.
Thank you both so much, and thanks to everyone who asked questions. Cool.